What's the difference between a Def Killer Wartrike and a custom booster blaster? About 2 inches. Welcome back to the Red Ones Go Fast. Old Big Mek here, and it is time to have a big, deep thinking about things. We're gonna channel all of our Mork and Cunning because this one's big. So big, in fact, put me specs on. That's right. This is one of those videos that is for every single Warhammer 40,000 player. We're talking about 10th edition, the new rules commentary, Munitorium field manual, updates, everything that dropped a couple of days ago. There was one major rule change that happened that has much further reaching consequences than Games Workshop knew or intended. Now, this isn't clickbait, this isn't inflammatory, this is, and it doesn't matter if you play competitively or casually, this is one of those fundamentally game-breaking things. This is like when 10th edition first came out and they had the data sheets with the keywords, and there were all the keywords missing from a whole bunch of different data sheets. There were transports that couldn't carry things, transports that could carry 30 things, you know, Gazgul could go in a truck, all that good stuff. This is like that, but not nearly as neckbeardy, because this Games Workshop came out with this rule thinking it was very, very black and white, but then once again forgot about all the different kinds of data sheets and models that are out there. And it is definitely going to make a difference. So again, totally serious video. We're not clickbaity. We need to discuss this. This is going to have major ramifications to how you play the game. So strap in, run into the comments section, grab your notebook to write down because we've got a lot to cover. Let's get into it. All right, first of all, the rule. It is in the core rules updates, version 1.1 with rules commentary 1.3. Those are the two documents that they've now combined into one. And you go down to page 3 and we get to pivots. Pivots is an entirely new, separate concept. Again, the 10th edition rules did have it in it to begin with, but it wasn't spelled out like this. They have made pivot its own actual value, like on a stat line. So now the pivot value is models have a pivot value of 0 inches unless otherwise stated. Monster and vehicle models, excluding models on round bases, and aircraft models have a pivot value of 2 inches unless otherwise stated. All right, so that's that right there. That is the big section that we've got to really think about. But first, what is a pivot? Well, they give it to you right here. When you're moving a model, if you're going in a straight line, you go in a straight line. If you need to turn, you pivot about a central axis. So you can move without pivoting. For example, they show this rhino here doing a little dorifto sideways. So it moved 12 total inches. It did not pivot. It is good to go. Now they show a pivot. Okay, you've got to move, but you've got to turn as well. Because you have to do that turn, and it is a vehicle, not on a round base, you have to take 2 inches away from its movement, so instead of going 12, it can only go 10. Funnily enough, when you do multiple pivots, there is no further reduction. That 2 inches is only for the first pivot. However, funnily enough here, the ending position of the rhino here and the beginning position of the rhino, it totally could have gone sideways, right? There was no reason why this couldn't have been a pivotless maneuver as well. But that is the long and the short of it, right? Seems pretty simple. If you've got that 2-inch reduction for being a monster or a vehicle, you know, you've got to take the 2 inches out. So now that you know what a pivot is, and you know which things have a pivot value of 0, where you can pivot as many times as you want, doesn't cost you any movement, and which things have a pivot value of 2. So you got to subtract 2 inches from their total movement if it is a monster or a vehicle model. Now, there is an exception. This one part is neckbeardy. The exception bracket is after vehicle models. It says excluding models on round bases and aircraft models. So obviously all aircraft are vehicles, and there are a lot of vehicles on round bases, so it makes sense why it's there. Does that also apply to monster? We don't know yet. Assuming it does, that might change some of the things I say. Assuming it doesn't, that can cause some more problems. But long and the short of it is, monsters have a 2-inch reduction, Vehicles, unless they are on a round base or an aircraft, also have a 2-inch reduction. So let's give some examples. This is a truck, all right? Orc truck, typical transport in Warhammer 40K, no base, and it is a vehicle, okay? So not on a round base, we are a vehicle, not an aircraft. This will have a 2-inch reduction in its total movement the first time it pivots during a move. Okay, we're following along. Sounds pretty good so far. This is a Chimera. This is also a very bog standard transport vehicle in Warhammer 40K. Again, no base, not on a round base. It is a vehicle, it's not an aircraft. So this one as well, the first time it makes a pivot on its move, it is going to have a 2-inch reduction in total movement. We're batting 1,000 so far, right? This is a Def Dread. Def Dread is a dreadnought. It is a vehicle. It is a walker, but it also has the vehicle keyword. So you would think, oh, okay, 2-inch reduction. Well, they did give that exclusion, excluding models on round bases. That is a round base. So our Def Dread here can pivot as many times as he wants, and there is going to be no reduction. Now that makes sense because a round base is round, right? Like when you turn it around, you know, him facing this way, him facing this way, him facing this way, it makes no difference. When you have something mounted on a base, you measure to the base. The measurement is the same no matter which way you turn, which way you go. He could crab walk sideways, it doesn't matter. Facing doesn't matter. We don't have armor face values in 40K anymore, which is kind of a sad thing. Those were cool. But yeah, so he's an exception. Easy peasy. So because this doesn't have a base, it can't do that. When you turn, right, now you've changed the length here because it's not the same as this length here, okay? Again, on the surface makes total sense. All right, here we go. This is a Wave Serpent. A Wave Serpent is a box standard transport Warhammer 40,000 for the Eldari faction. It is a vehicle. It is longer than it is wide. You would think when it pivots, you have to subtract 2 inches. It has a base. Its base is round. It is a round flying stand. So this model, as well as the Falcon, the Drukhari flyers, other things like that, the new Space Marine Primaris transports, for example, no pivot penalty. This thing can spin as much as it wants. It's never going to lose its range. Now you're going, okay, Big Mek, it's a hover tank thing. You know, sure, it should be able to. All right, cool, fair enough. This is a Defcopta. A Defcopta is a vehicle. It flies. It looks like it should spin in place. This is the base that it was delivered with when it was brand new. It has lived on this base for almost 20 years. The new Defcoptas come with an oval base. New Defcoptas lose 2 inches of movement the first time they make a pivot. Old Defcoptas don't. Now remember our friend Def Dread here? We talked about walkers and round bases and how round bases get the freebie. You get a big enough walker like Mr. Wraithlord here, oval base. So the first time he pivots, it's going to cost him 2 inches of movement. That's huge when you're talking about these bigger models that have a low movement characteristic. Like Mr. Morkanaut here. As much as I paint him red, he's not going any faster, and he is on an oval base. So the first time he pivots during a move, it's going to cost him 2 inches of movement. This is true of all the larger knights, Chaos Knights, things like that, and even your bigger Tau battle suits. Okay, now let's really hand it to him. This is an Orc buggy. This particular one is a custom Booster Blasta, but there's a bunch of different ones, right? Shock Jump Dragsta, Megatruck, Scrapjack, etc. They all come on oval bases. So all of these speed buggies designed to go flying all over the battlefield are going to have a 2-inch reduction in movement the first time they pivot, just like that. This is a Def-Killa Wartrike. The Def-Killa Wartrike is an Orc speed freak thing. It's a vehicle. It goes on a base. That base is the same size, except for it's not a vehicle. The data sheet for Def-Killa Wartrike only says mounted. So while these models are the same physical size, on the same physical size base, and to somebody that is not an orc player, you would look at these two and go, they're going to move exactly the same, you would be wrong. When this one makes a turn, it's going to lose 2 inches of movement. When this one makes a turn, it still gets its full movement because it's not a vehicle. And that's where we start running into the problems. It's those stinking datasheet keywords all over again. I have a whole list of them. It's by no means exhaustive. These are just the ones that right off the top of my head, I'm like, wait a minute, I know the datasheet for that. Went and looked it up and confirmed, and yep, sure enough. Okay, are you ready? Again, got the specs on and everything. If you are a Adeptus Mechanicus player, right? Your Iron Striders are vehicles. They are on oval bases. They are going to lose 2 inches of movement. But your Dune Crawler, which is a bigger vehicle, and frankly, let's face it, not as fast looking. It's got those big like crab leg things, right? It's on a round base. It doesn't have the penalty. So your faster moving Iron Striders that have a longer movement stat are going to lose 2 inches when they pivot, but your Dune Rider or Dune Crawler thing is not going to. Okay? There's more of those. The Field Ordnance Battery for Imperial Guard. It's on a round base, but also it's not a vehicle. It doesn't have the vehicle keyword. It doesn't matter. Again, the Falcon and Wave Serpent, we just went over. They're on a round flying base. Same thing with like the Tau Devilfish, your Space Marine, like the, what the heck is it? The Repulsor. It's on a round flying stand, so it doesn't count. It gets to turn. However, right back to Adeptus Mechanicus, the Scorpius Dune Rider thing. So the Adeptus Mechanicus transport, the thing that looks like a rhino with flying skirts on it, doesn't come with a base in the box. It sits on its little pegs. And so because it doesn't have a base, even though it's a floating transport, just like a Wave Serpent or just like the Repulsor, because it doesn't have the base, the Scorpius Dune Rider is going to lose that 2 inches the first time it pivots. But wait, there's more. The Adeptus Custodes Grav Tanks. Now, granted, we're getting to like Forge World stuff and resin and things that people aren't going to play and aren't tournament legal anyway or whatever. But again, this is for all players. Casual tournament, doesn't matter. This is the very basic foundational building block of the game. Custodes Grav Tanks come on oval flying bases. Because they're oval and not round, Custodes hover tanks are going to lose 2 inches of movement the first time they pivot. And there's more weird vehicle interactions like that. The Nemesis Dread Knight for the Grey Knights, it comes on an oval base like the Morganaut did, so it's going to lose 2 inches of movement when it pivots, but their actual Dreadnoughts are on the big round bases. They're going to have that pivot completely free and clear. The Tesseract Vault, that's the big Necron pyramid looking thingy, it's on an oval base even though it floats, and so its 8-inch movement is now going to be reduced to 6 inches because of that base. Cyclops Demolition Vehicle, the little teeny tiny thing that you pop out of the back of a not a Lehman Russ, like a Chimera, right? It does not have a base, and it is a vehicle, so it's going to lose 2 inches of movement. Same thing with like Grot Tanks back when they used to be a thing. But again, you're going to run into a lot of units that look like vehicles, smell like vehicles, but don't have the vehicle keyword in their datasheet. Most of them are going to be mounted. So a lot of things on horses and steeds and things like that, they're going to have the mounted keyword, but not necessarily the vehicle keyword. But that's not always the case. Chaos, especially, and Chaos Demons, there's a lot of things that are on oval bases that are going to get caught up in this. Your Forge Fiend and Mauler Fiend, for example, it's a vehicle, it's on an oval base, it's going to lose that 2 inches of movement. And then here's where it gets, speaking of Chaos and Demons, here's where it's going to get crazy. Do you remember the other keyword there on the pivot value that had the 2 inches with vehicle? Monster. Do you know what a very common monster is in the Chaos and Demon range? The Bloodthirster. Do you know what size base the Bloodthirster is on? Oval. So a Bloodthirster with wings is going to lose 2 inches of movement the first time it pivots. Now, do you know what doesn't have an oval base and is also a monster in the Chaos range? That's right, the Great Unclean One, Papa Nurgle himself, is on a 90mm round base. So the Great Unclean One can pivot completely free and clear the entire game, while Mr. Bloodthirster is going to lose 2 inches every time he changes directions. Does that seem thematic to you? Does that seem rules as intended to you? And Chaos are far from the only ones with this problem. Another huge one is the entire Tyranid range. Carnifex, Haruspex, Tyrannifex, all sorts of Tyranid models are monster. They have the monster keyword, but they're not on a round base. They're on an oval. And so every single one of those facing suddenly matters, because when they have to pivot on the battlefield to get around something like a rune, they're going to lose 2 inches of movement the first time they pivot, compared to other Tyranid monsters like the Prime that are on round bases and aren't going to have to worry about it. And again, that's where we get into one little neckbeardy thing. And again, this is completely because of the way Games Workshop writes their rules. It specifically states monster and vehicle models, and then has an exclusion after the vehicle models that says excluding models on round bases and aircraft models. Now, they're going to need to FAQ or a commentary or whatever on whether or not that round base exclusion also applies to monsters. Because if so, then there are going to be some Tyranid monsters that are going to be able to go pivot free. And there's going to be like the Avatar of Cain, for example, for the Eldar, that are on a round base, and they'll be able to get away with it. But rules as written, based on everything else in the rule book and how they do exceptions and brackets, those brackets technically only apply to vehicle models right now. But regardless of that, again, you're talking about monsters. Anything with a monster keyword is gonna have that 2-inch movement reduction. There are some very funny looking Chaos things that are surprisingly not monsters, such as the Burning Chariot. So you are really going to have to look at your data sheets and make sure you are keeping track of which unit has which actual keyword that's going to trigger this 2-inch pivot penalty. And that's why this affects every single player and every single style of play, whether you're playing in a grand tournament, US Open, or in a super casual game down at your friendly local game store, because you are only supposed to be an expert in your own army. And if you show up to play me and these 2 units are on the table next to each other, if you don't know my data sheets inside and out, you have no idea that this is not a vehicle. If I don't know Tyranid data sheets inside and out, I have no idea whether or not a Carnifex is a monster. I have no idea whether or not whatever random Chaos thing I'm facing, or Tau battle suit, some of them are walker, some of them are vehicles, some of them are both. These keywords really matter, and Games Workshop did not think about the entire range of keywords and base sizes that they have out in the world when they wrote this new rule. Now, let's stop being theoretical for a moment. Let's be practical. Let's put a couple of units down on the board, and I'll show you why this is a big deal. All right, here we have a pretty standard scenario. We have 2 units sitting behind a rune during a game. They've been well protected from incoming fire, and now it is my turn, and it is time to move them. Now, obviously, I have a piece of terrain here in the way. Both units need to move. I'm being very, very careful not to say the word vehicle, because again, our Deathkiller Wartrike is not a vehicle. Now, our Custom Booster Blaster here, if he has the ability to move sideways and drift, he can do that freely. So, for example, on this setup, I don't have any other terrain in the way. I can set down my ruler, measure from the front of the base there, 12 inches to the front of the base. We are good to go. Now, what happens when I do that? Because this is more than 2 inches in height, so we can't just move through it, and we actually have to thread this gap in between the runes. I'm going to move forward 1 inch. Now I'm going to pivot on my central axis. That's going to cause me to lose 2 inches of movement. So now I've already moved 1. Instead of 12, I've got 11. Take away 2, now I've got 9. I move forward however many inches I need. In this case, it's going to be, say, 2. I'm going to pivot again. Now, this second pivot is free. Again, you can pivot again as many times as you want. That doesn't cost you anything else. And now I can move the remaining of my 7 inches left, and now I've ended up here. So now instead of my unit being out there, it is here. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. We only made it to right there. In fact, we'll put Mr. Warboss there. All right. Now, take him out of the way. We'll put this one in. Because this is not a vehicle, the Deathkiller Wartrike is not a vehicle, I can pivot, move, pivot, move, and I end up out here, right? I am going to get 2 inches more movement out of this vehicle, this unit, because it's not a vehicle, than this unit that is a vehicle, even though, again, they are completely identically sized, both in model and base size, which means this unit now becomes much more useful in the rules because this unit keeps its full movement, will be able to maneuver around things, make its charges, all of that good stuff, and this one will not. It is going to go slower the entire game. Now, how about our Defcoptas? Now, apologies, I don't have one of the new based Defcoptas done yet, but the Warbikes use the same size base, so pretend that this is a new Defcopta, this is the old one. If my Defcopta needs to end up here, again, old style, it would be able to pivot, do whatever it needs, but if you've got the newer style one that has the pivot problems, when you run into a piece of terrain where it's not going to be able to stay on the terrain and it's going to want to fall off, and you now have to pivot just to get it wholly on that terrain so it is stable, that pivot's going to cost you that 2 inches of movement. This is really big. So now ask yourself, on a utility value, is this unit going to be worth it anymore because this particular one has a vehicle keyword versus the other jet bike type units not having one and being able to now outdistance this across the battlefield? Are your monsters going to be worth taking? You're going to have to really look at your chaos list and your demons list and go, okay, am I going to be able to get these charges off with things like a bloodthirster? So this is a big deal, and it's very clunkily implemented, and it's going to cause issues, especially in a competitive tournament scene. Now, obviously, if you play casual, talk it out with your opponent, figure out what makes sense, and go from there. But man, if you play any kind of competitive game, if you are trying to follow the rules, this is a sticky mess of a rule. Especially when you consider that so many of the vehicles that I mentioned that are on oval bases have such large oval bases and short movement characteristics. Things like your the Tesseract Vault, right? We talked about that. It only has the 8-inch movement. A lot of the Tyranid ones only have an 8-inch movement. The I don't know what the Mauler Fiend is, but I know that like some of the Chaos ones can be quite short as well. So you're talking about a base size that's the size of a dinner plate, right? That now is being penalized by that 2 inches. Now you've only got 6 inches of movement on it. And how are you going to maneuver that around these really densely packed battlefields? Because you can't move over anything that is less than 2 inches or more than 2 inches in height. And if you do try to move over something, you have to subtract that out. So if you go up a 3-inch wall to land on top of a building or a rune or whatever, like that's another 3 inches down. So even your maneuverable looking, feeling, sounding units suddenly don't have the maneuverability that they did. And because we tend to be so bad with estimations, oval base size, right? Like on a Knight, Gorkanaut, a few of those other units we've talked about. Let's look at 6 inches on that. Yeah, it's going to move less than the actual width of the base in some of these instances. All right, so that's it. That's the video. That is the big controversy. Once again, keywords have gotten Games Workshop in a ton of unintentional hot water with 10th edition. So what are you going to do when you are having a game with your opponent? You're going to need to look at their data sheets. You're going to need to know keywords. Is that unit a vehicle? Is that unit a monster? Does that unit come on a round base or an oval base? Is somebody using a perfectly legal but older unit on a base that might have had a base change? What is the official ruling on flying bases? What is the official ruling on monsters and round bases? These are all questions that I think need to be answered by Games Workshop before we go any further, especially before any tournaments like, say, I don't know, the upcoming Tacoma Open Grand Tournament, which is a few weeks away. I think that one of the ways they can actually fix this implementation is going to involve fly. And I think that a big part of that is, again, the poor Adeptus Mechanicus with their Scorpius Dune Rider thing. No base. It's currently getting completely boned by this. So if they decide that the fly keyword, which I'm pretty sure it has a fly because it's a hover tank, that should help alleviate that. But again, I don't know what you're going to do on a lot of these things that have different size bases for the same type of unit. But yeah, so I guess the red ones don't really go faster because bloodthirsters are now slower than great unclean ones. The world has been turned on its head, topsy and turvy, until we get this figured out. That's all the Morkin I've got for today. Thank you so much for hanging out and watching this video and listening to me going through everything, really understanding the nuance of what's going on here, and that this isn't just clickbait, sky is falling stuff. We really do have a fundamental building block issue here, and we definitely need Games Workshop to step in and fix it. In any case, tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd love to have a discussion about it. If you want more in-depth discussion, head on over to our Discord server. There's a link down in the description below. It's completely free, not tied to anything. We have wonderful community there with some great rules discussions where, again, not even like super competitive play, but just, hey, get your basics answered. What are we talking about here? Let's get this figured out together until Games Workshop gets there. But this is definitely something every 40K player should be talking about. All right, that's going to do it for this video. My brain hurts. I've been battling Nurgle all week long. I've had the COVID. And yeah, so that's all I've got for today. I'll see you all down in the comments below. And until next time, Wagon!